You're listening to the Misfit Preachers, Tullian, Tchividjian, Jean Larroux, and Byron Yawn from ProdigalPodcast.com. We're plagiarizing Jesus one podcast at a time. Now, here are the Misfits.
Welcome to Misfit Preachers. It's such a privilege to be here. I'm here with Jean Larroux and Tullian, Tchividjian, and we're having a good time. Yeah. We're having a very good time. I was having a conversation before we recorded with a young mom who was present. She was just kind of asking, what is this thing and what are you doing?
And this podcast.
The podcast, Misfits.
She saw the stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And what's the purpose behind it and what are you trying to do? And I said, there are a lot of ways to describe it, but I can tell you how we're doing it in terms of accomplish what we want to accomplish, which is setting people free to rest completely in the work of Christ and in grace, which is a hard place to get to for anybody, for me, for you, for Jean. I said one of the things we're doing is we're going to go first. We're going to lead by example and put ourselves out there because, you know, we've all sat in that circle where somebody over here has confessed something in their life, put some struggle in their life out, and you immediately go, I'm not alone.
Right.
Somebody put words to what I've been struggling with but couldn't articulate. I was never going to tell anybody I'm trapped in this mindset, situation, struggle, whatever it is. And so that's really the purpose of the three of us putting our cards on the table, right? It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing for you, for Tullian, or for me. Maybe it is for you've done it many times at this stage. But that's the core. We want you to feel safe here. We want to earn your trust by demonstrating what this looks like. So therefore, we're all telling our stories. And today, and these are privileged moments. I know that these are privileged moments. And another observation I would make, these types of conversations are rare among most people, but they shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a huge privilege to sit in the presence of another person's honesty and brokenness anyway. And then reciprocally for that person to have people step toward that and not away from it.
Right.
To echo what you just said, Byron, I have noticed over the last 8 years or so that I've been sort of putting myself out there, not because I wanted to, but because I literally felt compelled to. I discovered that when someone shares their successes with you, their wins, you may feel temporarily inspired. But when someone shares their failures with you, you feel much less alone in this world. Right. And that, like you said, is our hope, that people would recognize they're not alone.
Yeah, that's a very, very succinct way to put it. You know, the bromide is you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. I don't think we take that seriously until you fail.
Right.
Really, truly,
that's
in
right.
a deep way. So we're honored that you would do this.
Thanks.
It really is a privilege, and we hold it that way. So I'm going to let you.
I feel that.
I'm going to let you start.
Tullian, when you gave it was so helpful for me the way you framed it when you described your story, especially hearing the extended versions of that. And I love how each of our personalities kind of show through in this. You know, to your point of kind of the I'll go first thing, it's been the better part of the last 6.5 years probably that I've been pretty transparent with my story, but worked in one particular church in a city in doing that. And I think the thing that happens when you're willing to go first or continue to go first would probably be a better description at this point, is that people don't feel like they're alone. They don't feel like they're the only ones. They don't feel like they're crazy. And they immediately begin to tell you their story.
Immediately.
Right.
It is a guarantee.
Because they feel safe.
When I was leaving, before I left to start Misfits, this older woman came up to me who I had known for the last 5 or 6 years when I'd been there, and she was crying. And she hugged me and she said, I don't want you to go. And I said, I don't want to go either. I said, I understand. I have so much affection. I love you too. And she said, you don't understand. She said, who's going to go first now? And And I said to her, I said, Kathy, you will. Like if you've been bitten by the bug, like you don't need me. You got this. And so I hope that's the result.
Before you launch, can I know you have more knowledge on this than I do. And you don't have to give. No, it's true.
Maybe if Buffett trivia.
Parrot head. Narrative therapy and telling your story is such an important thing. It's how I process stuff, and I didn't even know I was doing something that therapists recommend that you do. But it is very. Speak into that for a moment, because eventually we want to hear other people's stories.
Absolutely.
How powerful is it, and what is the power in it in your mind?
Well, I happen to be familiar. I'm not by no means even a subject matter, novice, but I'm familiar. The Allender Center in Seattle, there was a gal named Kathy Lorzal who worked with Dan Allender and started doing what they call story work. And story work is basically framing your trauma, your recovery, all of those different things in the framework of these snapshots. And so you begin to look at what the surface things that happen in your life are and what the things under the foundation were that started the tremors originally.
Right.
And so a guy named Adam Young out in Colorado, Kathy Lorzal, Dan Allender, they would be great follows, great reads for any of that information.
That's helpful.
And hopefully we can springboard any resources. If this stuff resonates, we can help you.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, thanks for
Interesting bit of trivia. Dan Allender and my dad worked together back in the early 80s.
Really?
Early mid-80s, yeah.
Gosh, it's so impactful.
I grew up in South Florida because when my dad finished his PhD in psychology at Marquette University, Larry Crabb reached out to my dad and said, I'm thinking about starting a private practice. Would you come down here and start it with me? And Dan Allender was working under Larry at that time. So that's why I grew up in... Larry Crabb is the reason why I grew up in Fort Lauderdale.
Is Allender's work with Kathy and the stuff that Adam has, all those things are incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
We'll list. There'll be a link somewhere. You can get resources. We're glad to share. We want people to have the same resources we have access to.
So what you're saying in asking that question is, it not only helps others when you tell your story, it helps you. It's therapeutic.
Yeah, the way I see it practically, and then I'll be quiet and let John take the floor, is that most people's lives and or trauma, or even the good bits of it, are like taking a puzzle, dumping it out onto a table, and then throwing the picture on the box away, right? And when you start to write these things out, the picture comes forward, and the pieces go together.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like having a "you're not crazy" conversation with yourself.
And your self-awareness is raised higher and higher and higher.
I appreciated what you put out recently about in your social media about the importance of self-awareness as a goal for sanctification in the Christian life. Excellent.
Yeah.
So
I'll take your analogy, that puzzle piece picture, and frame this conversation with that. We've all seen those pictures that when you step way back from it, it's like a face or something like that. But when you get really close, the face is made up of thousands of little bitty pictures. And they were used as the pixels, but when you can step back, you see the big picture. If you stepped back and looked at the big picture of my life, what you're going to see is idolatry, arrogance, self-service, fear, and pride. These little vignettes I'm about to share are the little pictures that make up the big story.
super helpful.
Very helpful. Very helpful.
I was a church planter, disaster recovery guy when Hurricane Katrina hit the Mississippi Gulf Coast in 2005, August of 2005. We lost my aunt and uncle, both drowned in Hurricane Katrina. I was working for a big steeple in Memphis, Tennessee, and went down there to help recover their bodies, help the city recover, and ended up starting a recovery organization. We hosted, 17,000, 18,000 people over 5 years. It was wonderful and terrible, exhausting, and all those things. As Tullian described some of the "you're on the rise" thing in his story, when you do something at ground zero of the greatest natural disaster in U.S. history, people happen to notice more than if you did that in Des Moines, Iowa. Mm-hmm. It's not different work. It's just work with a spotlight on it. But that spotlight, if you step back and the big picture is it's all about me, that spotlight is like a drug. Mm. And so you start to believe your own press.
Yep.
And you start to be, when people question you, you bristle. Everything has to be, but on the surface, it just seemed, like it's all together. And it was something that was incredibly helpful to many people, and the notoriety was intoxicating. Mm. The work was exhausting. And after about 5 years, the opportunity came to go somewhere and just preach. All you got to do is preach, teach, and write. And we'll do everything else. Mm. And I was like, well, I need a break. I'm exhausted. And felt truly the sincerest sense of calling to this particular church. The message was communicated to me as, we're lockstep with you. Well, some were and some weren't. And what happens when some were and some weren't, the ones that were in line with my message, we formed an incredibly tight bond. The ones that weren't started to feel this arrogant ass start to poke them from the pulpit. I didn't want them, I mean, this is terrible to say, but it's honest. I didn't want them to really get what I was saying. I just wanted to win the argument.
Sure.
I wasn't communicating truth in such a way that it was compelling and magnetic to them. It was just this jackass poking them in the eye every time. And the worst part about it is I was right. I mean, the theology's right. It's in black and white, it's right. But I'm most dangerous when I'm right. And so created a context that was really a pressure cooker for a church that had two philosophical things underneath, but it played nice up until that point, and I didn't play nice. So we went to war, and the church split. 2,500 people turned into 700 real quick. You lose money, you lose staff, you lose notoriety, and about that time, Tullian and I are both digitally going after the entire world about the gospel. Fighting inside denominations, outside of denominations, getting called grace boys, they abuse grace, on and on and on. And we're both so self-absorbed that at least we were like, at least somebody else is doing it. And so we knew Steve Brown did it before we did, and we knew Tim Keller did it, but he was nice about it. And so we're just like, oh, we'll be dumb and dumber and we'll just freaking crucify everybody. And we did. And we were right, and I'll speak for me. And so wrong, because I wanted to win.
What would you do different if you could go back?
Oh, that'd be a whole episode. Jesus said they said a bruised reed he would not break. He was always tender with people who were struggling. He was always very firm with people who were inflexible.
So your mindset would be different.
I mean, I shut the gates of grace in the face of people who were asking honest questions, and I didn't have the humility or the patience to let them ask a damn question.
Yeah.
Without being blasted.
We were talking a little bit about this, the three of us, a few days ago, off camera, but it's very tempting when you know you're right about grace to become self-righteous toward those who are self-righteous. And the danger is
that's me.
Something like this. You think you're good. I know I'm not. That makes me better than you. Which is
put that on my tombstone. Yes.
So, and you're right. It's dangerous. We become a Pharisee to the Pharisees. It's very, very, very tempting to do.
When I made this discovery and shifted, I think the net effect on people, the visual that explains it for me, is I ran into a sandwich shop and declared that I had discovered sliced bread. We were like, yeah, we've been here for a while. And then the other thing was, and I'll let you continue, is that grace was hard for me to get my head around. It still is.
Yeah, me too.
And it's hard for those who have lived in a different world to get their minds around as well. it takes a minute. And I asked that question because, and I think you answered this way: softness, gentleness, compassion.
I'll give you one little window into this. There was a conversation that started on a little thing we did called Pastors on the Patio, where we sat down to kind of answer questions about grace and how does it work? What do you do next? When do I get past the gospel? All the normal questions. And there was an individual I'd been talking to off and on who had some real struggles with the things that I was saying and had made no bones about it. She had been candid. She had come to me privately. We had done, really had followed what I would consider to be the right protocol. Wasn't gossipy, wasn't any of that stuff. And at Pastors on the Patio, that private conversation we had, she revisited the same questions. And so I started answering them. I said, well, we've said that. And I said, that your biggest problem isn't what you do wrong. It's what you do right that you think is okay. And she said to me, she said, well, if that's true, then my greatest problem is not my sin. It's my self-righteousness. Mm-hmm. And I said, you are hearing me 100% clearly. Yeah. And she said, well, I've looked in my heart and I've asked the Lord, and there is no self-righteousness in there.
Yeah.
And I said, in front of 75 other women, in the list of what's actually wrong with you, self-righteousness might be a virtue.
Jeez, you were a real ass, huh? In my heyday, I would have never said something like that.
I just want to note for the record that Tullian Tchividjian just said, I'm not as bad as that guy.
Exactly.
Steve Brown said the same damn thing.
I'm feeling very self-righteous right now.
Now you both feel better about yourselves.
I'm leaning into the leper. I feel clean.
But here's the truth. There was somebody who was honestly struggling with the real weight and the conundrum of grace and couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
And her pastor was such a smug, self-righteous asshole that he decided he would spike the ball in front of 75 people and watch her crumble and put the mic down.
Yeah. Yeah. Michelangelo once said that the best way to critique something is to create something more beautiful, to present something more beautiful. I have had that quote memorized since my graduate school days. And the times that I have actually applied that or employed that have been few and far between, especially during that season in my own life.
In my personal critique of fundamentalists in the beginning of all this, I became a fundamentalist in the opposite direction.
Sure.
You were a fundamentalist about not being a fundamentalist.
100%.
Sure.
Yeah. Got it. That's why I love what you said early, that I'll just judge the judgers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're a Pharisee to the Pharisees.
And so take that Polaroid and tack it right there. At that point, for the better part of 10 years, my first wife, Kim, and I had been going to counseling, doing lots of things. Life had always been hard for us as married people. I am 100% responsible for my 50% of the problems that happened in our marriage. A church split and a church plant did not create a context where two unhealthy people got healthy together.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it, couldn't see it, was in it, and was blind to it. If I had that's why I think doctors don't work on their own it couldn't be objective and just couldn't see up from down. And so the last ditch effort to quote, save the marriage in that, and this is hundreds and thousands of dollars of therapy, was, okay, I'll leave the ministry. I'll just resign. The only thing I've never tried, we've tried inpatient, we've tried outpatient, we've tried everything we can do. The only thing I haven't tried is just get out of ministry and let's see if that fixes it. It didn't fix it. Because when the problem is you keep going with the problem, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I forwarded myself.
Wherever you go, there you are.
There I was again, the same guy, and didn't have the humility, the right amount of counsel in my life, or the right ears to hear it. And she and I divorced in 2015, at the end of 2015. It was initiated by me. It was me throwing my hands up and giving up. It was her saying, can't we do something else? And me saying, we've already done everything. And just wanting to stop feeling the pressure, the pain, the shame of having left a church, having had a church split, all the things that were said, and all the stuff deep under the surface that I didn't even know I was coping with as I built this mosaic of me. And that's all there. Well, if you can get rid of the problems around you, which first problem, church, gone. Second problem, job. Now I'm no longer officially don't have my union card anymore, so I can go sell insurance, or which is what I did. And then, well, we'd have a terrible marriage. We'll just get rid of that. Because remember, the goal is to finish this mosaic, which is this beautiful portrait of me. And those things were black spots. And so you got to get rid of them. So you just pluck them out. And I did. And worked and loved my kids, and there were college graduations all spread throughout this story, and I moved to Nashville, where I started dipping my toe back in working with the world of faith, and saying, can we help churches find, people that are good grace, people that work with the church? And so a little bit kind of an executive headhunting in that sense for churches. It was great. Went out on a couple of dates with people, and I was on Match.com. This is not a promotion for Match.com. And met somebody on Match, and her name was Valerie. People always ask, this is where, people always say, what's it like? Like you've been in this, forbidden land, the forbidden land of online dating. And I basically say this, everybody has 4 pictures. At least every woman on dating apps has 4 pictures. Here's the I'm a good mom picture. Here's the I work out picture. Here's the I don't eat bad food picture. And then here's the crazy me living life picture with the hot air balloon ride. And I just had all shirtless pictures.
I think I just threw up in my mouth.
You would have never met Valerie.
No, they don't allow nudity. And so it was, but
knowing you would have thought, they'll see the humor in it.
I truly would have thought they'll if they don't get my personality, and then you get no swipe left for me. Val and I, she swiped. Is it right or left?
I have no idea.
Val swiped right on me.
I'm happy to say I don't either.
I know. I don't know. I actually know the answer, but Valerie swiped right on me. I swiped right on her, or left, depending on which side of the equator you live on. And we fell in love. She had worked in the church before. She had worked in a large steeple in Atlanta, had a lot of things going on in terms of her exposure to the church world, and I thought it would be pretty impressive.
In that window, did you feel the kind of the tailwind of there's new lease on life, and we'll go complete the picture in that moment, or? Oh,
listen, we're re-releasing the iPhone, baby. I mean, this isn't an Android coming out. I mean, we're
remastered.
You're going to be able to check your stocks. Right. I mean, we're re-releasing this brand. I mean, Larroux is coming back, baby. I mean, all I needed was a wife. The divorce is far enough in the rearview mirror. I got a wife. I'm back I'm in the groove. So
you thought that would make you accepted again amongst the religious folk that you wanted to get back with.
Yeah, the 50-year-old divorced guy feels creepy.
Yeah.
I'm the singles minister.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. And so in my mind, at least, that had to be there. What I didn't know, and what the picture tells you, is that I was really looking for somebody to fill out the picture of me, not me looking at someone to see who they were. And so when you date someone with the intention of using them, not knowing that, you just take what you want. You use them. And we met, we dated, all the things you would imagine are normal. And that picture is coming together. I had started to get a job. I had a pretty decent lead on a job in Nashville with a pretty significant organization, used my master's degree. I mean, I was like, I'm back. And because of who I am, under the surface, we're sleeping together. We're drinking too much. We are living just using each other in every way that you could use another person. And truly figured, Jesus, I mean, we're getting a pass. Like, we've been married, but Jesus understands. We've been married before. I mean, I'm not a spring chicken here. And so, and thought, we're going to get married. So we're just, I mean, God's outside of time. So this just all counts. And the truth is, it's just this gross rationalization of, I just want what I want. That all came to a head. You know, God, the last words, and I love this. Sometimes there are these great words that the Bible records of people saying that you just can't forget. And the last words of this king, this Old Testament king that was this group that was always fighting, you know, Israel, called the Babylonians. And they had this king named Nebuchadnezzar. And he had this terrible thing happen. God kind of, you know, whips his ass, and he comes back and he gets in his right mind. And the last words this guy ever says is, "He who walks in pride, God is able to humble." It's the last thing he's ever recorded as saying. And that's true. And so we went out one night. We were spending some time that afternoon planning what we were going to do. We had thought about going to dinner or whatever, and then we heard this band was coming. And so we had started texting each other and talking about the plans for the night. She was like, "Oh, I can get Hannah Maria, who's our daughter, to spend the night out, and then we can have the house to ourselves." And we're both like, you know, bow chicken, bow, bow. You know, that's what we're thinking. I mean, that's just the truth. It's the truth.
Yeah.
And so, because, I mean, remember the picture. Don't forget the picture here. This is about me, my needs, my wants, my desires. And we went out to the band, had too much to drink, and Hannah Maria called and needed a ride home from the spend the night party because something had happened at the house. A water line broke, or there was a small fire or something. Valerie got very concerned and wanted to go get her, as any normal mother would. Well, I knew if there was a fire truck or a police car there, I'd been drinking, and I wasn't about to add a DUI to my spotless record. So I said no. And I'm from South Louisiana originally. She's from Miami.
You had a lot to drink.
And I had a lot to drink. But we both have, you know, a high tolerance for loud conversations. And that's what a chicken shit way to say that. We both yell at the drop of a hat. And we got in a screaming match over whether or not I was going to go at Hannah. And she's like, "You're not a good father." And I'm like, "Well, you're demanding and you want too much and you blah, blah, blah." And we're going at it. And she says to me, she says, "Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to call that guy, because I know him in the church where you want to get hired. I'm going to call him and tell him you're drunk and that you are driving. Good luck getting the job then." And we're driving in the car, and I reached her and said, "Why are you pushing my buttons? Why are you always pushing my buttons?" And I physically pushed her 3 times when I said it. I had to be driving 100 miles an hour in this insane moment.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the guy who won't drive to help her is driving to get home.
To
right?
help himself.
To help himself, because don't forget the picture. And so we got back. I drove back to her house, dropped her off, and I had taken her phone so she couldn't call him. And she walked inside and she said, "Well," she said, I don't care if you can have my phone." She goes, "I've still got the internet. I can email him." Oh, well, you know, if we're going to war. And I pulled the plug out of the wall and it shorted out. Dramatic fashion. The neighbors heard us screaming and they called the cops. By this point, I had gotten in my car, driven to the other side of the complex, and passed out in my car. Laid down and said, "Okay, I'm not driving. I'm not that stupid." About 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and got in the car to drive home, ostensibly, and got pulled over on the interstate in Nashville. Blue lights behind me, and I thought, well, I'm fine. Who knows what they want? License and registration. The female officer walks back to the car, and she says, "Oh, Jean Larroux." She goes, "We've been looking for you." And I said, "For me?" She said, "Do you know a Valerie C?" And I said, "I do." She said, "We've been at her house for the last 3 hours about what happened tonight." She said, "I'm going to need some good contact information. We'll be in touch." And I said, "Okay." And I went home and called a friend of mine named Bob Bradshaw and told him everything that had happened, and was concerned about how elevated everything had gotten, but didn't catch the gravity of what had happened. At about 6 a.m. the next morning, the Williamson County Sheriff's Department arrived at my pool house where I was living and arrested me for domestic assault and destruction of property.
I've been in those sort of moments where like a gun goes off by your life sort of thing. Describe your reality in that, and like knock on the door, what's happening.
It's surreal.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel real. It feels like, wait, this is a TV show and I'm watching it,
Bad boy,
but I'm
bad boy.
but I'm in it. And I really, in a lot of ways, I think time stood still.
Yeah.
And then you go through all of the, you're fingerprinted, you're given Crocs, you're given prison clothes to wear, you do all those different things.
You were given Crocs? That's
Yes.
a crime.
It's all the rage in prison.
It's all the Raven Olive Branch, too. For being honest.
You got to love that as I'm describing being booked, Tullian's like, what a terrible fashion choice that is.
Were they
like,
white Crocs with an orange jumpsuit?
They were orange.
Oh.
There's a method to my madness, but we'll get to that later.
I got it. Now, you need to know how deep my self-righteousness goes. I mentioned this to you guys the other night at the vault, but even as I was being arrested, I said to the police officer, charming her, I said, do I need to turn around and put my hands on the car like on TV? I said, or can we just do the noble front cuff thing? She goes, I guess front cuff will be fine. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not that bad. Mm-hmm. I just got the front. I don't have the jacket to drape over it because there are no news cameras. But other than that, I was still finding like, well, it's not as bad as it could be in all those moments. And but it was worse than what I knew it was. So they booked me in jail. It was April 9th. And I know that was my daughter's birthday. They'd taken my phone, so I couldn't call her, and that was on my mind. And then they give you a cell, and there's no clocks, there's no windows, there's the brightest, like, if you've ever been to a vet's office and seen how bright those lights are, that's how it is inside, like when they book you. So you're sitting in there, and it's about 60 degrees. They give you a blanket just big enough to make you mad. It only goes up to your shoulders, and your feet are uncovered, and then it starts about mid-chest. It's just, even if you turn it the triangle way, it still didn't work. And I'm just laying there, and I all I wanted was a Bible. And I felt myself like, I just want somewhere in, I kind of like tapped into immediately, like, this is what people do when they're at the end, the end of their rope. I need the Gideon's Bible in the hotel dresser drawer. They didn't have any. And so I had to go with what I had memorized. And unfortunately, I have more Jimmy Buffett lyrics memorized than Psalms. And had time to sit and write. And so I started writing the goodbye note to the kids. It was done. I was the level of shame, embarrassment. My life is over. It's ruined. I'm taking my life when I get out. I know I am. Now, I've mentioned to you guys before that God, like being from New Orleans originally and kind of that whole thing, God's voice to me when he speaks to me is like when he talks to Job. It's real sarcastic. And so when I kind of concocted this plan, like, kids, I love you. I brought so much shame on you. I can't live with myself. You know that God, that where I am, you'll be fine, insurance money, blah, blah, blah. And all like in the corner, if there would have been a visible representation of God, it would have been
the slow clap,
the slow sarcastic clap. And God says, well, 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 isn't this a great plan we have? So let me get this right. Because of your unmanageable, unbelievably great public sin, you're going to use your death as the atonement instead of Jesus's death.
What voice, in whose voice do you hear God's voice for you?
It's just that. It's sarcasm. There's no like dialect in it.
Or a particular person's voice that you've heard before. Because I have a feeling the reason Byron asked you that question is when God speaks to him, he hears a particular person's voice. He told me
once that it sounds like Theo Vaughn.
Oh, it is that same sarcastic. Yeah, it's that. Yeah, absolutely. That same banter.
And for you?
Morgan Freeman.
For me, it's
Billy Graham.
Yeah, for me, it's my mother. It's my father when I'm being congratulated. It's my mother when I'm being punished.
We'll get to your wounds. Momentarily.
And And I said, literally out loud, I said, well, then what am I supposed to do? And God said, give up. And so you don't know how long you've been in there. There's no time. And I just laid there and thought and tried to sleep and cry and pray. And my friend Bob Bradshaw picked me up, and he knows me well enough to say, hey, listen, we're going by your house and you're going to give me your gun. He goes, that's not the answer. I said, how did you know? He goes, you think I don't know you? You think I don't know what you've been doing for the last 12 hours? And I was like, okay. And then he took me to his house. And I know there are people here listening who have just been let out or about to go in or everything's fallen out. You understand the meaning of somebody putting you in their car and taking you to their house and feeding you from their table and not locking the bedroom door when you go to sleep after you've just been arrested for a felony. It was the coolest drink of water that I could have ever imagined in that moment. Because behind the mosaic that I want you to see is the picture of me that I see. The one nobody wants. And what Bob and Rose did, they walked over and they took some of the black off of that picture, and there was life behind it. And that's what started to happen. In that moment, I stopped filling out this damn picture and started pulling black tiles off the other one. And light comes through. God was working on Valerie at the same time. We're not allowed to talk to each other because of the nature of what I was arrested for and the nature of what I did.
I'm curious, too. I think that's a providential piece of this whole thing, because if I were in your shoes, the very first person I would try to start convincing otherwise or manipulating
for sure
would have been her.
Yeah, of course.
Well, the analogy I just gave is the ultimate picture, but the truth is that's exactly what I wanted to do, because this picture is crumbling.
And
she's got the tape. She's got the duct tape.
And the inability to do it is maddening. I don't have even the opportunity to do it.
It's like
without legal consequence.
Separating someone who's addicted to substances from their substance.
Right.
There's a withdrawal.
There's no
from
question.
Control.
There's a freak out.
Control's a drug.
Because even apologizing gives me some measure of virtue.
Sure.
You can't even apologize. You can't do by proxy. You can't do anything. And so my therapist at the time, there was a lot of hurt both ways and a lot of wrong done both ways. Val would say amen to that. And my therapist said, I think in order for you to really deal with this, you're going to need to just put it down on paper. We'll bring it to the next session. We'll tear it up, burn it. We'll be done. You can get that frustrated feelings with Valerie and the circumstances all out. She said, just write it down, email it to me, and then we'll do it together. So, okay. So I started writing it and went to bed. Thought I was going to finish it. And my buddy Bob called me the next day, and he said, why did you do it? And I said, do what? And he said, contact Valerie. I said, I didn't contact Valerie. He said, Jean, I read the email. I said, Bob, I didn't send her an email. He said, Jean, it's time for the lies to stop. Like, he's done with this picture. Like, dude, the gig is up. And I was like, I didn't. I had started writing the email to my therapist in a shared email group that Valerie and I had. And so the draft of it, every time I wrote it, and we're starting, this is the kind of letter that starts with, you Jezebel. And laundry listed. Every single nuance of every single thing I could contrive that she had ever done wrong to me.
I got burned by technology too.
And me too.
Yeah. And she read every word of it, unfiltered, without. It didn't say to my therapist. The letter said, "Dear Valerie."
Wow, man. Has she ever described the feeling of having read that?
No.
Really?
And I've never asked.
I cannot.
I'm surprised. I'm going to ask her next time I see her.
Yeah.
Do we have shared Google Docs?
No, that's a good. I think that's a really good question. to be able to say, I mean, I'm not all about digging up dead bodies, but that's.
I mean, I have some people in my life that at times have said really, really vicious
Harsh things.
like caretakers of my life, people.
Right.
But those people never sat down and did a bullet point on their disdain and contempt for me.
Yeah, she read it. And then she testified for me.
On your behalf.
On my behalf. Unbeknownst to me. She spoke to the judge.
After reading the letter?
After. That was 10 days into it. I went to court 50 days later.
Bro, that is our entire purpose in one episode. I would have left your ass in there for show in that context. That's not true. I wouldn't have done that. But
if you were his wife, you may have, or his girlfriend, you may have. Sure.
Yeah. That's the grace in that is
supernatural
and ridiculous, and in a supernatural.
And even more amazing, she didn't go in touting my virtue or pleading mercy. She went in saying, "Me too." She said we both should have been arrested. We were both out of control. We were both doing wrong. But you've got to remember, this is 2018, 17, 18. So the Me Too movement
is at its peak.
And Valerie flipped the script. Not Me Too the victim, Me Too the perpetrator.
Yeah.
I mean, who does that?
Yeah.
Me Too the perpetrator. Unbelievable. So I was given 12 months of expungible probation.
What does that mean?
It means that you admit that you committed a felony, you're not denying it, and if you are successfully completing probation, alcohol counseling, anger management, and check in with your parole officer or probation officer, then it never happened. And I asked the judge when I'm like, we're really never, like kind of still vote, all those kind of things that a felon can't do. And he said, Jean, if you're ever asked by anyone, if you successfully complete this, if you're ever asked by anyone, have you ever been arrested? The answer is no. And I said, what do you mean? He said, it never happened. He said, when you go the last day, he said, they will hand you your file. And he said, and that is the only copy.
I can get to the doctrine of justification there.
My sin is cast into the sea of God's forgotten memory.
I sat on the front steps of the Williamson County Courthouse and sobbed like the first time I'd ever heard the gospel. Like, they let me take my shame and carry it out. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Where do you think you would be had it been an actual felony count? Where would
Sitting at this table with us.
No, I know where you would have gone, but where would you have been? Where would you as a person, I don't mean geographically.
Oh, yeah. It would have been a dark spiral. A dark, dark spiral. Yeah, I there's nothing I'm not capable of. It would have been dark. The shame would have been too much.
Yeah.
I get that. Like, I get that for the people listening that they say if anybody ever knew. The truth is, when it all came out, it was the most free I've ever been. I thought I was going to die. I felt like I was going to die. I was sure I was going to die. If not killed by the circumstances, killed by me. But I was actually coming to life. Yeah. That was the crazy part. When you hug the cat and you say, okay, this is me. And I remember posting on my blog the morning before I went to court the whole story of what happened. And I said, I don't know whether I'll get to touch this blog again. But here's what it is. And
what compelled you to do that?
Because I knew you start to really think about the people who are suffering in the world when you're suffering. And you think there are people out there. Somebody's going to read this and it's going to be their court date. It's going to be their inability to say me too or whatever. Somehow God can use this. And that was my hope, but I needed to get the story out. I needed to write it out. And I only had the guy driving, Bob was driving me to court. That was it. He knew the story.
I wrote some things in the immediate aftermath of my world exploding publicly and put it up on my social media. And, of course, they went viral because the story was so fresh. And I regret writing all of those things because I know that the reason I wrote them was because it was even in that moment of complete collapse, I was gifted enough and enough of a wordsmith and enough of a manipulator to be able to begin the process of getting people to feel sorry for me.
Control the narrative.
Control the narrative.
Yeah,
Absolutely control the narrative.
Yeah. I didn't think that was your motivation behind.
No,
it.
and I'm not saying that was yours. I'm just reflecting on the stuff that I wrote in the immediate aftermath.
There's no way that's not also. It's not. That's an and.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
Right. It has to be. But you can't. If you're intellectually and emotionally honest, the picture that I've been building was a picture of me, which is what you're saying. Like the next consistent puzzle piece would have been start managing the story.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. When my first run at Repentance, Flawless Impersonation, there was always a very accurate description of what I did, a brief silence, and a but, da-da-da.
Sure.
Yeah. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely in there at that moment. It took the better part of 3 years after that. Valerie and I married while I was on probation. It was November 26th.
Also fabulous. Grace.
When was that?
November 22nd, 2018.
Okay.
And
wow.
Yeah. It was amazing. We had all the kids got married on SEC football Saturday in a college town, Oxford, Mississippi. Whoop, whoop.
Hotty toddy.
Absolutely. And then God started to say, okay, now that we've wed ourselves.
No, go Hallmark movie only. Stop right
Just
there.
stop. And it's been beautiful ever since.
Pumpkin.
She and I were hired by Chip and
Christmas
Joanna
farm.
Gaines
Christmas
to create a
farm.
whole homewares line. No, it was a shit show. Because all the stuff so let's fast forward all the way we'll get close. We'll go back 3 months and then go forward. Okay. 3 months ago, Valerie and I sat eye to eye, knee to knee, on the floor.
3 months ago from where we're sitting right here.
Correct.
Okay.
And I said to her, I used you when I married you because I needed a wife to get back into ministry. And she said, and I used you when I married you because I needed a dad for Hannah Maria and help paying the bills. Let's start there.
Yeah.
3 months ago. This isn't 3 victorious years ago. This is 3 months ago, not because I'm so astute, because my therapist finally said, are you ready to finally say truth?
And at this point, you've been married for 6 years when you have this conversation.
Correct.
Right.
I mean, we've been through therapy, we've been intensives. What I didn't know, and what she didn't know is, we were both building a Mosaic, and we kept stealing pieces from each other. That piece. If I don't have that piece for my picture, then my life won't be okay. And she goes, but if I don't have that piece for my picture, then my life won't be okay. And you took my picture. And we had to tear him up. Because until then, we had just been negotiating the exchange of puzzle pieces. What will you give me for that one? What will I give you for this one? Will it work out? And it's been in this process that we go, okay. The Idolaters Anonymous Club is welcoming new members. And to be able to really say that, and it's taken that amount of time, that amount of therapy, group therapy, individual therapy, pastoral counsel, counsel from friends, and my horoscope.
What are you, by the way?
Taurus.
Pisces.
Cancer.
Makes sense.
Like the cancer question
It
yesterday.
explains all of us.
It does. Next week, the moon of Jupiter. And so I guess what I'd say is it's live. I mean, I want the Hallmark story. I really do. I mean, I'd like to be able to say, and then after court, we went and had dinner at Cracker Barrel.
If there was a Cajun version of the Hallmark movie, it would be phenomenal if you were the lead.
But it's live. The struggle is real. It's now. It's not in the past. It's now.
I was packing my truck to come and record with us, And we had gotten in an argument. I don't even know what it was about. But we're aware enough of our propensity to build the picture that Val knew. She said, you know what? This is not the week that we need to spin the top. So she said, you know what? You want me to go see Hannah Maria for a week in school and I can just work from the apartment and it'll be great and give you some space? Because I care enough about you to leave right now because I know that if we get into it, it's going to spin you up. And at first, the thought was intoxicating. I was like, honk, honk, can I get your bag for you? And then I thought, wait a minute. Only a person self-aware enough to know that that would be a problem is actually safe enough to be around. Mm-hmm. So if you know that don't trust yourself, then now I trust you. And it was so beautiful. I was like, and I told her that. I said, I think the answer would have been yes, but now that you ask, it's no.
Are those sorts of things skills that the two of you have learned, tools that you have learned to love each other?
If I say anything that sounds remotely healthy, it is something I learned. It is not a tool that comes naturally in my toolbox.
Yeah.
If it comes out of me and you're like, man, that sounds like a really good decision.
You're stabilized. Yeah.
No, that is triage. They pack the wound. No, my life, if you get to the understory, the image is everything. And if anything gets in the way of the puzzle piece you want, you just crush it. And so if you go back to the story and each of the little vignettes, it was about me asserting getting big so I could control the narrative in Huntsville. I could control my wife with the marriage to Kim. I can control my image. I can control all of those things. And the way you do that is you open the toolbox and there's a hammer.
And when you have a hammer?
Everything's a nail.
That's right.
Everything's a nail.
Yeah.
I remember there was a guy who was talking to me about discipleship, which I don't like that word, but he was a friend of mine who happened to be talking to me about his shit, and I talked to him about my shit. That's the better definition of discipleship. And he said to me, I was telling him something, and this is when the kids were little bitty. I was talking about my obsession to have the room picked up and the toys put in certain places and control the environment. And he said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. And he said, how do you think your kids will ever go to God when their lives are messy if they can't make it through the afternoon for fear that their dad will come home?
Bro, that is gold. It's gold.
And I said,
it's exactly right.
It's exactly right.
And it's exactly what tens of thousands of people have learned about God, not just from parents, but Christian schools, churches, youth groups, Sunday school classes.
From me.
Well, yes, but
I
I'm
purported
saying
that story
Sure.
until God destroyed me with grace.
Right.
That was, I mean, I was a part of the problem.
Yeah.
You're right.
But he's exactly right. We communicate something about God even when we're not communicating something explicitly about God. There's no question.
Yeah, I'm glad you re-articulated that because I'm certain there are people's visions, views, perspectives of God that are shaped like the tens of thousands.
No question.
And they don't even know
They don't know it.
They don't know it.
No.
Yeah, God is the Father who walked hand in hand with Valerie into the judge's chambers and pled for my exoneration and sat with me in a prison cell waiting for them to call my number and come to court.
Yeah.
And he was in both places.
Sure.
And that's what's so beautiful about grace and in the gospel. It makes you a gracious person. It turns you into that.
Put some texture on grace in this context. Like you give it for the listener that, like, I think they're right. My view of God has been shaped. How would you change their perspective by leaning into the idea of?
There was a billboard in Huntsville, Alabama on Governor's Avenue that had been there forever when I went to work for the church in Huntsville. And the billboard said, God's not mad at you no matter what. And
Can't be true.
I drove by it the first time and I thought, it's missing the asterisk. Except.
Yeah. Fill in the blank.
Right.
Jean Larroux.
Right. Unless you're me. Or unless you're you or in that moment of shame. And what grace is that billboard signs his name and puts your name at the top. Like I really can't screw this up. Like I can't run so far that I've run off of the foundation of who you are.
That is an impossible concept for people to get.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. Well, there are hosts of reasons for that. The primary one being we are conditional people who live in a conditional world with other conditional people. There is nothing in our lives, no relationship, no attachment to anything, person, place, or thing that is unconditional. Yeah. It is impossible for us to be unconditional people in this life.
Right. There's a phenomenon in cinema, particularly science fiction, that anything that has to do with an alien, there's a reason an alien, you can always relate it to something in your experience. You can't create an alien that isn't comprised of something in our visual experience. You've never seen it. They either have eyes, long arms, or tentacles, or all these things. But what we have to work with in our creativity ceiling is that. And grace has always been like that to me. It's like it's literally inconceivable to fully form it in our minds because what we have to work with here limits our understanding.
It's like John in Revelation when he's describing this vision of heaven.
Yeah. Or Ezekiel with the wheel, he's going, well...
And he's like, it kind of looks like what I think may be a sea of glass. It's not a sea of glass, but it kind of looks like, it's almost like there's absolutely no reference point. And so the unconditionality of God's grace and love, his one-way love, is so otherworldly without any reference point for us in our everyday experience that it is actually impossible for us to understand it unless God opens our eyes to see glimpses of it. And when Valerie shows up on your behalf, that is a glimpse of grace, that God is there just to remind you or anybody in the situation. I've had tons of those from various people. So has Byron. So have you. It's just a reminder that I know this doesn't make sense, but it's true.
Well, I'll add one more, and then we can do some questions.
Sure.
I'm sure I left things out, but y'all will. I love the questions from you guys.
You land it when you want to.
So if you ask me, what is grace, right? It is fall of 2019. Valerie and I have married in November of 18. In the fall of 19, the football season comes around, and we're SEC people, and we have a family reunion once a week in Oxford.
It is an actual season where we're from, like fall, winter, spring.
And you don't plan a wedding then if you're listening. And we go every week. We tailgate at Ole Miss, and it's great, and the kids are there, but it was the first time since Valerie and I had been together that we were there, and one of the kids had invited their mom, my ex-wife, Kim, and she was coming to the Grove for the first time. And you could sense, we'd all been tailgating together. I'd been there with Kim as a wife, and now I'm with Valerie as a girlfriend, with Valerie as a wife, and then with Kim as an ex-wife, but never in the Grove tent. These are 10 by 10 pop-up tents, a few of them together, in there with a present wife and an ex-wife. And you could feel it.
I feel it here.
I've been there.
I feel it right now.
I've been there, not in the tent.
Gus, we're going to need the bourbon.
Yeah.
And trigger warning. And so you could feel it among the friends, among the kids, and everything else. And we are sitting there, and you heard one of the older kids say, "Oh, Mom's here." And then you could look in this path, and of course, y'all have seen pictures. There's tens of thousands of people. Kim is standing out in this open air portion where the public is, not coming into the tent.
Wow.
And Val says, "I don't think she'll come in here unless I go get her." So she walks out of the tent and throws her arms around my ex-wife. She says, I'm so glad you're here. Kim said, I didn't know if it'd be okay. And she said, Valerie said, this is where your family is.
Yeah.
She testified on her behalf as well.
Yeah.
Dude, I don't have that gear.
That's what grace is.
Yeah.
And then, if you fast forward 2 years, they're sitting together under the same tent talking about what they're going to do when I'm dead.
And planning your murder?
They are planning on riding in the same limousine. Valerie said, I'll get the life insurance. Kim said, I got everything when we divorced.
Yeah, you are worth, to them, more dead than alive. Both of them.
And that is grace, too.
And they're not joking.
No, they're not.
Not
They're probably texting right now, laughing about it. So,
brother, man.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, kind of without words. I don't. There's no bow to put on it. But I would say, I love when I meet a person, and a person's in my life, and I notice these virtues, the benefits of close friendship, graces that they have, a gentleness, wisdom, whatever, and you wonder, where did that come from? And then where the source of that is in their story. And the closer you get to them, the more you can approximate that virtue was shaped by this experience, and this attribute is shaped by that experience. And as you tell the story, I know you well and love you dearly. You've been such an unbelievable good friend to me. When you tell it, I'm like, I see it. I still don't know where your sense of humor came from. That's just
my mother.
Nurture. But you also can rewind that story and see how grace begins to eclipse fear and self-loathing and all those things. So
we're a work in progress. And when we talked the other day, I think for me there'd be one takeaway is like grace is live. These aren't rearview mirror stories for us in this. It's live.
Were you the one that said that the struggle's live too?
I don't know.
I think you did.
It is
and
live. Isn't that like
struggle is
the
real.
struggle's real?
Yeah, the struggle is real.
Right.
You've been listening to the Misfit Preachers. Like, subscribe, and share. More grace-centered resources at prodigalpodcasts.com. That's Prodigal, Prodigal, podcasts with an S.com.